Welcome to the Garden Angelist, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Carol Michael from Indianapolis, Indiana, where I have a suburban garden measured in square feet.
And I'm Dee Nash from Guthrie, Oklahoma, where I garden on several acres out in the country.
We call ourselves Garden Angelists because we are evangelists for gardening. We love gardening and we want others to love it too.
Yes, we do, and we aren't afraid to spill the beans and tell all of our gardening secrets, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. But that's enough of who, what, when, where, how. Let's move on to this week's episode. Hello, Carol.
Hello, Dee. And how is your garden today?
My garden's great. I think we got a little frost down in the back garden because when I was looking at stuff yesterday, there's some things that have already turned. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
It's unusual this time of year, but we've had a couple of really low days. I moved all of my indoor plants indoors and into the greenhouse. I cleaned out the greenhouse from its summer slumber at the same time. Plants came from High Country Gardens. I'm not sure how that happened.
Okay, you ordered them.
I got Golden Torch Goldenrod, which is Wichita Mountain Solidago, Carl Forester feathery grass to put on the side of the back garden to try to discourage the deer. And I bought 2 of their swamp milkweed collections, which means there's 6 plants of 3 varieties. 6 plants total, 2 each of 3 varieties. So I'm not sure where I'm going to put all those, but there's always the meadow.
There's always the meadow. And you have here that you wrote a post about your pelargoniums, which are now inside the greenhouse.
Yes, I haven't published it yet, but probably by the time this is ready, because we recorded a couple of days ahead, Claire took pictures of me yesterday in the greenhouse, and I will have those on the blog, and we'll put a link to it.
Very nice. So, Dee, I am very certain that we have had frost. We are recording this on Monday, October the 5th. I woke up this morning and it was 33 degrees.
Yikes.
There was definitely frost
sad.
on the pumpkin, frost on the tomatoes, frost on the peppers, because the vegetable garden is at the end of the backyard and there's just the slightest slope down. So, that air just kind of goes down. So basically anything that wasn't under tree cover or up by the house got frosted. But I don't know that it was the killing frost, but I would call it a moderately heavy frost.
Yeah, we haven't had a killing frost, but it's coming. Usually ours, yeah, it's coming. I don't know. I had a thought about something you said, but I can't remember. Oh, I know. I made fried green tomatoes last night.
Oh, that's a good use of those tomatoes that weren't going to turn.
They're not going to turn, and they weren't going to be big enough. So I did that, and they were so good I ate way too many of them because I only eat them once a year. But
that's true.
Anyway.
Well,
so
our average first frost date is October the 10th, so we're right in line. But, you speak of, you don't know how those high country plants got to your house.
Oh, there's more. I ordered pelargoniums too.
Way to go, Dee.
This research is killing me, man. Anyway, go ahead.
My 500 Coenodoxa bulbs that are going in the back lawn have arrived.
Mine haven't yet.
So I'm not going to plant them until later in October. And I think if it doesn't rain, I'm going to have to water the lawn some before I can plant them because it's just hard as a rock out there.
Yeah, definitely water it. It's what I do in the meadow. Before I plant anything in the meadow, I water first because, And then I have to water in the things in the meadow that I just planted because it's really dry here right now, too. It wasn't, and then all of a sudden it became dry.
Huh.
Which is kind of like our quote.
What?
It's kind of like our quote we're getting ready to have. Anyway, your mums are blooming.
Pansies love this weather. It's very crisp and clear out there. I just need rain.
We do too. Oh, well.
And plenty of it.
So does California.
California needs rain.
I think they get it first. California gets the rain first. And then maybe they'll be so kind to send it our way.
Well, you might get rain from California, but rain for us generally comes up from the Gulf Coast and swings up and around.
So you need a tiny tropical storm.
All right, because the Rocky Mountains just kind of stops everything from actually getting to Indiana.
I can see that. Why don't you do our quote?
I will. And all at once, summer collapsed into fall by Oscar Wilde.
I love Oscar Wilde. What a writer. Yes, and that's kind of what we're talking about. I mean, things are definitely changing, and it's almost over. And I got to pull out the rest of my tomatoes out of their pots, and I took cuttings. And so I took cuttings of my coleus and some other tropical plants.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about what to do with vegetable plants in a little bit. But let's talk about what we decided to talk about was invasive vines and their counterparts. And it seems like, as things sort of turn in the fall and trees start to lose their leaves, the vines really sort of show up. And you can start to see some pretty aggressive vines around
the invasive
ones.
The invasive and aggressive ones, both. Yeah. So you talked, I think, last time, because I listened to our podcast, I think it was last time, you talked about how your neighbor has a vine that you see and you're like, oh my gosh, they need to get some of that out of there. But I think the ones we're talking about now, well, the first one is, it's a tale of 3 vines. I thought that was pretty cute.
Yeah. So I'm talking about the trumpet vine and the cross vine, which all 3 have, and there's the native trumpet vine, that's Campsis radicans.
Right.
And then there's the Chinese trumpet vine, which is Campsis grandiflora. And then there's cross vine, which is Bignonia capreolata.
Mm-hmm.
So the native trumpet vine, I would say, is aggressive.
Because we're not supposed to say that native plants are invasive, because how can they be invasive if they're native to an area? And that's true. But boy, it's an aggressive vine, extremely aggressive.
And the Chinese trumpet vine, though, it is invasive.
Horribly invasive. When I was a kid and I was little, we lived at this house on 26th and Ridgecrest, actually, in Oklahoma City. And all along our back fence, we had a double lot. And at one time, that gardener lived there. My parents were not gardeners. But there were apple trees and peach trees in the back. And at the very end, in the back corner, was trumpet vine. And I'm sure it was grandiflora. And it covered that entire back fence. And you knew what loved that trumpet vine?
Hummingbirds.
Wasps.
Oh, wasps, yes.
It was really bad about wasps. And one time I got punished and I had to clean off the fencing all the way around the yard. And when I got to the trumpet vine, I thought I was going to pass out because I was scared of the wasps. I was a little kid. So anyway, don't plant trumpet vine. That's all we're going to say about that.
Right. Don't plant the native trumpet vine. Don't plant the Chinese trumpet vine. Now, you have cross vine, right?
I do, because it's hardy to zone 6. So you probably don't see it very much.
No, and I did try to grow it, and it grew pretty well. And I decided that I didn't want that aggressive vine in my garden. So I've been I know where it is. And for the last 10 years, I just go and nip it off every year because it keeps coming back.
So it probably dies down to the ground almost anyway in your climate, because it is barely hardy in my climate. I mean, it's hardy, it's ground hardy, but in Texas, it stays evergreen all winter. Right. And in Oklahoma, it doesn't. And the only bad thing is I planted it in the back garden on an arbor where I used to have a rose, and that garden slopes down the same way your garden slopes down. And so over time, we get these little frost pockets. And if we get one in early spring when it's blooming, or mid-spring, that messes up the vine for most of the year. However, when it blooms well, it looks really great, and it can grow really, really big in Texas and other points south. But in my Oklahoma garden, it grows to about 12 feet. That's all it does. Yeah.
And I'd say it's probably where I had it. It's obviously root hardy because a little bit of it comes back every year. But I have never grown it to flowering. Let's just say that.
Maybe you should let it flower, because it's not going to put down seed.
No, it's kind of in a hidden area. But anyway, hummingbirds do love crossvine, so that would be a good reason to try it.
And a lot of butterflies like it too. And it's also the larval host for the gray hair streak butterfly. And I have a lot of gray hair streaks in my garden, and I think it's partly because of the crossvine.
And it is native.
It is native.
Yes.
It is. And it's a really nice plant. And it's called crossvine commonly because the petals make a cross.
Right. But we're going to say no to trumpet vine, and we're going to give a link to an article, and then let's move on. There are 2 wisterias out there. Mm-hmm. Another very woody vine, I'll call it.
There is.
Wisteria frutescens, which is the American or native, which some people call Kentucky wisteria.
Well,
And
they're
then there's-
different. Wisteria frutescens is American wisteria, but there's a Kentucky wisteria, and the species is different. I can look it up real quick while you talk.
I did not know that. I think I have the Kentucky.
I know because I grow the Kentucky.
You look that up. Well, the Chinese wisteria sinensis. And
okay, so here's the Kentucky blue wisteria, which is the one that is the other wisteria, and it is macrostachya.
Macrostachya. I think I have macrostachya out there.
I have both, and they're completely different in that in my garden, their growth habit is completely different.
Really?
Wisteria frutescens is more aggressive than the other one.
I'll have to go find that label.
Interesting, huh?
I do know that mine has scent when it blooms, and the Chinese wisteria generally does not have scent.
And it has leaves when it blooms.
Yes. I would only plant the native ones.
Oh my gosh, don't plant the other. Don't plant the Chinese. No. It tries to take over your whole house. And on top of that, it's just not good. It's not good for anybody. You can plant either one though. The Blue Moon Kentucky wisteria is not, in my garden, does not grow as aggressively as Amethyst Falls, which is the other one.
Yeah, I have to go back.
And there's probably a species too, because both of these were selections, but they're what you see on the market.
Right.
I don't ever see just the...
Just buy a nice native and don't buy the Chinese. That's all we got to say.
And one time I gave a talk at the Pond Society here, and there was a man in the audience, and he was really mad that I grew the American one. He thought that the Chinese one was more beautiful because it bloomed before it had leaves. And I said, yeah, but half the time it doesn't bloom anyway because we get a late freeze. Right. And it kills all the blooms. This way, you almost always get blooms from the American one.
Right.
You might not get as heavy a bloom if you get a late freeze, but you'll get something.
That's true.
And you know what? I like the leaves. I think they're pretty, and the birds like them, and the birds like it in the winter. They use it as shelter, stuff like that. It's a great plant. Now, on to our next one, the bittersweets. There's Asian bittersweet, which is also known as Chinese bittersweet. And there is the American bittersweet.
Both are huge, twining, woody vines. And so,
right.
And there is a tree that I walk by twice a day when I do my daily walks around the neighborhood. Got to get those 10,000 steps in. But they have Chinese bittersweet growing way up into this tree. I mean, it is enormous, and it's so obvious. And I get little spots of it in my garden, and I can think of 3 spots where it kind of keeps showing up, and I keep pulling it out because it would be a mess. A mess.
And the reason it shows up in your garden is because birds eat those berries. Yep. And then the berries, they carry the seeds, and of course they poop them out, and then it ends up in your garden. And there's also a theory, it's in Doug Tallamy's book, that these plants that green up faster in the spring that are Asian and also stay green longer in the fall, they often berry at a different time, and sometimes they make the birds sick. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I have to think about that. But the way you tell the Asian from the American is the Asian has berries along the stem. American has the berries at the tips. The American has smooth edges on the leaves, and the Asian has tooth edges on the leaves. And never, 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 never. I mean, I think that probably Asian/Chinese/Oriental bittersweet is on our invasive plant list.
It is. I'm sure of it. It is here. It's terrible. And you know what? We have an American bittersweet in the forest across the street, which is also our land. I see it every year. Yeah, it looks good this time of year. But basically, they all are terrible. Now, that was 3, right?
That's 3 different vines. So we've talked about...
So we have one more. So it's like a baker's 3.
4.
So it ends up being 4. Like a baker's dozen is 13.
I don't know.
So it's a baker's 3. So we have one more. And I hate this plant with a special kind of hate.
Sweet autumn clematis.
Oh my gosh, I hate this plant.
Clematis ternifolia, which is from
Yeah.
Asia.
It's
And it
terrible.
looks like Virgin's Bower clematis, which is Clematis virginiana, which is native.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is the opposite of bittersweet, where the native has a tooth-like leaf margin and is not a huge self-sower. The non-native has smooth leaf margins and is aggressive.
Oh, when they say aggressive, they aren't kidding either.
No.
I remember when I planted this 32 years ago, I had no idea what I was getting to. And I planted it on that same arbor because I had this idea that I'd put the rose on one side and the sweet clematis on the other. And wouldn't that be so pretty? And it grew so well the first year that my friend Katie looked at me and she said, I think you need to rip that out. There's something wrong with that plant. We both didn't know enough back then, and nobody talked about how absolutely invasive it is. And I did. I dug it out, and I am still digging out spots of it even now. I find it all over my garden, like you do the bittersweet. It's terrible.
Well, the sweet autumn clematis, when I was in horticulture school back in the late 70s, believe it or not, they taught us sweet autumn clematis as a desirable landscape plant. Only it went by this name, and I'll never forget it because it's the longest name we ever had to learn how to spell. It was Clematis maximowixiana.
That's right. It used to be called that. I remember that now.
Clematis maximowixiana. And the thing is, I think some nurseries that don't know their business very well
still sell it.
Keep selling this, and it's like, you don't buy it.
Heck,
Simply
I saw horsetail for sale at a local nursery here. And I almost went and said something to them, but then I thought, you know what, I've raised heck with this nursery more than once, and so they don't like me very much. So I just was like, never mind. I sound like I'm so disagreeable, but I'm really not.
No. And you did find the Wildlife Habitat Council, you found a list of 10 native vines. So we're going to include a link to that in the show notes.
Right. The takeaway from all of this is if you're going to plant a vine, think long and hard about how and where it'll climb and how big it gets. And go ahead and choose a native variety because it helps so many pollinators, especially butterflies, because we have pipe vine. There's lots of things. So if you want to encourage butterflies in your yard, plant native varieties.
And then I would also say, I think that big woody vines like these, I consider these advanced plants. I would not advise a new gardener to just plunk these in until they really understand the aggressiveness that a vine can have.
Well, in that top 10, they also have trumpet creeper, which is Campus radicans, which we just told you not to plant. So Ignore that one. And our friend Leonie, who lives out in the east, she would say don't plant Dutchman's pipe, which is one of them, Dutchman's pipe vine.
Yeah.
I would say plant coral honeysuckle. It also has an Asian counterpart, but the coral ones are beautiful in Oklahoma. And we also talked about that in another podcast.
Right. And they have Virginia creeper on the list, which is Parthenocissus
I had to laugh.
quickfolia. And, that shows up in different beds. And people, first of all, they always think it's poison ivy. It's got 5 leaflets.
Yeah, not 3.
And so you should pull that out when you see it.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. I can't get it pulled out. In the shadier parts of my garden, I can't fight it anymore. I live out in the country. So actually it intermingles with my American wisteria. And it looks really pretty in the fall because it turns this gorgeous red, which is kind of like Boston ivy does. So I've decided to make my peace with it and just periodically deal with it.
Fair enough. Well, and Boston ivy is actually from Asia. It's Parthenocissus tricuspidata. It has 3 main leaf lobes. Virginia creeper has 5 main leaf lobes. And the reason they call it Boston ivy is because all those Ivy League colleges have it all over the buildings.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that makes sense.
Yeah, they are covered with Boston ivy, which is from Asia. And when I went to
you
Purdue,
don't want ivy all over your stuff.
When I went to Purdue, some of their older buildings had a lot of ivy. And I'm trying to think that some of it was probably Virginia creeper, but some of it was probably Boston ivy. But anyway, our warning to you before the next quote is, be careful with big vines.
Yeah, just be careful. And we didn't even talk about some of the other vines. There's so many.
There is.
So here's our quote. Listen, the wind is rising and the air is wild with leaves. We have had our summer evenings. Now for October eves. Humbert Wolf. Ooh, that sounds spooky almost.
It does sound spooky, but I thought it was kind of nice, Summer evenings just go on, and now it's like dark so early.
Yep, it is.
But the other day...
and pretty soon we're going to fall back and it's going to be even dark earlier.
I know. But the other day, my neighbor, I said, well, they're talking about frost over the weekend. And he said, oh, I'm going to have to bring in this one pepper plant that he had that he thought was really nice. And he's going to try to overwinter it in his sunroom. And I thought, good luck. What do you think, Dee? You think you ought to be overwintering pepper plants in sunrooms?
I laughed when I saw this on our notes. No freaking way should you overwinter a pepper plant. It'll get diseased and it'll drop its leaves. And I mean, even if you tried to grow it under lights, it wouldn't do very well. And you can just start it from seed again next year.
That's what I'm thinking. And with the
but
internet,
I have to remember, you guys live in Indiana and you can't grow peppers like we can down here. I mean, I have pepper plants out there loaded with peppers right now. There's no way I'll eat them all. And so I don't care. By the end of the season.
I'll just tell you this, Dee. I pulled out a truck full of peppers the other day, and I thought the rest of these are just going to have to succumb to the frost because there's no way I can eat all those. We do get, it's been a good pepper year because it's been kind of hot and dry, and that's what they like, hot and dry.
Right.
So,
I mean, you can find pepper plants here in the spring on every corner. And speaking of pepper plants, I read this really good issue of New Mexico. It was New Mexico Magazine or New Mexico Cooking Magazine. I think it was New Mexico Magazine while we were in New Mexico on our trip. And it was all about the big Jim pepper. I mean, the whole issue was about chili peppers because they're obsessed. But the big Jim pepper. And you know what? I grew the big Jim pepper this year. And I have to say it was one of my favorites. But I digress.
Very nice. So that's really all we wanted to say was you do not bring in vegetable plants to overwinter. No. It's just not going to happen. Start them again.
You can start some sprouts if you want to. If
you listen to our podcast, we're going to start telling you like in December. Start ordering your seeds, people. Start ordering your seeds, people, so you don't get caught at like last spring.
There you go.
So, ready for the quote?
I am.
One need never be dull as long as one has friends to help, gardens to enjoy, and books in the long winter evenings. By D.E. Stevenson. In a novel she wrote called Listening Valley.
That's pretty. We've got a lot of books to read right now, too. We have one on the bookshelf, which we do every week. But you and I have been reading like gangbusters.
We have been reading like gangbusters. So I wonder if it's because we're not like hawking on that social media anymore. We've got more time to read.
I suspect so, although I'm a little bit on it, but not much. I don't have it on my phone. Mm-hmm. I did that talk last weekend, so I had to promote the talk, and I wanted to. Well, hey, by the way.
Shout out to all the people from your talk. I think a lot of them listened on Saturday, if I'm looking at the stats.
I think they did, too. And also, did you know that it counts for the Denton County Master Gardeners? Our podcast counts as 30 minutes of continuing education.
Well, it should be that way nationwide, Dee. Nationwide.
Isn't that sweet? I was really impressed. So thank you to the Denton County Master Gardeners. We love you too.
So our book this week, and we'll have to kind of back up a little bit. So I've been reading D.E. Stevenson, who wrote books in the 30s and the 40s. And you recommended that I read books by an author named Miss Reed, who wrote in the same time period. And the first one I read, it's like I never got through it. But I am reading the one you recommended, which was Green Thrush, and it is actually pretty good.
I like Green Thrush. Yeah, it's good.
But Miss Reed wrote a book
Thrush. Isn't it Thrush Green?
Thrush Green. Well,
yeah, because Green Thrush sounds like you got a mouth disease.
Whatever.
Thrush Green. Anyway, keep going. What book are we talking about? Not Thrush Green.
So Miss Reed wrote a book called The English Vicarage Garden. And we sort of talked each other into ordering good used copies, as we call them. And it is a good used copy.
It is a pretty good used copy.
And so I'm trying to think. This book was published, it says it was first published in 1988. But it seems older than that.
It seems like the 70s to me.
It does. And that
The
could
pictures seem like the 70s
and that
the
could
style.
be that she was an older woman when she wrote this.
Could be.
But the interesting thing is, she writes about all these vicarage gardens. And so when I combed through this thing, the great naturalist Gilbert White was an English vicar, and she talks about his garden. And she talks about the garden of the Reverend Canon Henry Nicholson Ellicombe, which I know of because Elizabeth Lawrence he wrote books about gardening. And
he did.
Just to kind of read about his gardens and some of these gardeners, I mean, the names of the gardens and the names of the gardeners that she's talking about were long gone by the time she went and visited the garden. So sometimes it's the remnants of what they had, like Gilbert White lived in the 1700s. So it's fun to read because it has that style to it from the mid 20th century.
I thought it was very soothing, and it was kind of fun to look up some of the gardens now to see if they're still there. Some are, some aren't. Gardens don't often outlive their person. You know, we talk about that sometimes. It's a very soothing book, which the news is not soothing right now. So if you need to pop out of social media for a while or get off the news station, this would be a good place to go.
I think any book that just describes gardens at this point would be a good place to go.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I'm reading another book, which we will talk about in a later podcast, and I find it so soothing because it doesn't talk about the coronavirus.
Well, and that's the thing. So when I read books by D.E. Stevenson and Miss Reed, I mean, some of them are written before World War II. So they know nothing of the big bad world. And so they're very sweet in that regard.
No, all they've been through is World War I, which was bad enough. But they haven't been through all the other stuff that we've been through since then. So that's a good point. It was a peaceful time. So we're going to our garden commission.
Let's do the dirt.
And
let's do the dirt, then the commission.
Let's do the dirt first.
We have two pieces of dirt.
You switched them around on our notes, so it's your fault. Okay, go ahead.
So the first dirt you found, and that is landscape fabric is bad. And that's all we want to say.
And our friend Beth Botts wrote this for the Chicago Tribune, and we will link to it. And it is bad.
Friends use landscape fabric.
Yeah, if you want to line raised beds with it to keep soil in, that's one thing. But this idea that came out, I don't know, was it the 90s that we top all of our beds with landscape fabric and then we dig these little circular holes for our plants? Bad plan. I still know people who do it. In fact, one of my friends did it to his gardens the other day, and I was like, why would you do such a thing? And one of the reasons that it's bad is it compacts all the soil underneath. And I know this because I worked up at St. Mary's at my church, and I do their gardens, and they were covered with landscape fabric when I got there. And underneath that stuff was concrete. It took me months to get it back to normal.
The soil just dies under there. It just doesn't
dies because
oxygen.
It's suffocated.
So, and my nephew's wife is going to plant some shrubs, and she said she wanted to put down landscape fabric.
No.
And I texted back and said, no landscape fabric. She says, okay.
Because the other reason is you won't stop the weeds. People think they're going to stop weeds, but it doesn't, because all the weed seeds just blow in on top of the mulch, which is on top of the landscape fabric, and they just germinate in the mulch.
It's just crazy.
And so just don't do it. And, just keep putting mulch on top of things and letting it decay. And we're talking about mulch that decays. Don't put lava rock on there, for example.
Right. So anyway, enough of that. Gardeners don't let other gardeners use landscape fabric. End of story.
And Beth does a really good job in this article of talking about it. Although I don't know if she's as emphatic as we were, because she's a real journalist. So she keeps things pretty balanced.
Pretty balanced. So I got a Google alert on gardening last night. Newsflash T. Are you ready? This is in Psychology Today, and it came out this month. Gardening's good for your mental health.
No kidding.
No kidding. So they go on and they have studies and different things. And so it's like the bottom line they said is Hundreds of millions of people engage in gardening and other nature-based activities in all world regions. Regular gardening has established beneficial effects on general physical health and well-being and reduces the severity of depressed mood, anxiety, and other mental health problems. Then it goes on to say, the serious widespread mental health consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic provide even more reasons to engage in gardening for health and well-being than during normal times.
Okay, and what I would say about that is it kind of fits in with last week and all the people who started but didn't know what they were doing and are now quitting because they're depressed about it. Don't be depressed. Just take your time. It's okay. Gardening is a process. And it's okay if you don't get everything done. Like I said, I worked in my greenhouse this weekend because I was upset about the coronavirus. And I was watching the news and I texted you and I said, I'm going to go out in my greenhouse now and take some cuttings from all my plants and clean up my greenhouse. And guess what? I felt much better.
Good. Very good.
And got exercise.
Yes. So we have a commission for ourselves. Now that I've had the first frost, there is no reason to keep anything in that vegetable garden. It all must be cleaned out and be prepped to put leaves all over it. So that's my goal.
So you're going to weed it, right? You're going to take out your plants and weed it.
Yeah, it doesn't have too many weeds. I've kind of kept up with the weeding, but I'm going to pull out the tomato plants, the pepper plants, the skeletonized green beans out there. I'm going to pull it all out. And like I said, get it ready for mulching with leaves. And actually, there's one bed that I had already cleaned off that had all the squash, and it's already got a good leaf covering on it. So
good.
That's the commission. What are you going to do? Same thing?
Another reason to clean up your vegetable garden is you get rid of all those plants that all the bugs are in.
That's right.
And are
you going to do the same thing?
I already did a lot of it, but yeah, I'm going to pull up the rest of the tomato plants probably this week. I want to know if you ever ate the buckwheat pancakes.
Not yet, but I do want to thank you for sending me buckwheat flour, and I need to go get like buttermilk and stuff. It needs buttermilk.
You can just make sour milk. Just put vinegar in regular milk. Look it up online.
I don't even have regular milk. I have to.
Okay, it's important to have milk. I'm not shipping you milk, but I did ship you syrup, and I shipped you buckwheat flour. Yeah, not buttermilk.
And I will. I'm going to the store later today, and I will endeavor to get buttermilk and any other ingredients I might need.
Okay, and then you need to eat them with your friend because she will like them too. All right, I will probably clean up more, and I'm also going through all of my pots in the greenhouse and still taking more cuttings and getting rid of pots that are just completely destroyed. Well,
that's a good goals. Yeah. So we will report back next week how well we did.
Okay, sounds good.
So we want to thank everyone for listening to the Garden Angelus. If you like our podcast, please tell your friends about us.
And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, we'd love a 5-star review that helps us get noticed by others. And be sure and hit that subscribe button because the more people that subscribe, they don't miss an episode.
That's right. And be sure and check out our show notes for links for more information about today's topics, plus links to our own websites. And if you want to help support us, use the affiliate links. If you buy something after clicking through on them, we earn a small commission and it costs you nothing. And it helps defray some of the costs of putting on the podcast every week.
It was lovely to chat with all of you over the garden gate today. Bye until next week.
Bye.